And China's like, why are you here? We're not doing anything wrong. All we're doing is building whale watching islands. And the US is like, yeah, we see you. We see you, supersonic whale watching fighter jets. Hey friends, welcome to the channel. Ryan Neo here. Today we're going to talk about how it would play out if the US was to go to war with China. A lot of this is going to involve China trying to take over Taiwan and the US stepping in and saying, In this conflict, it's worth saying that this is going to be as ugly as a one-legged man in an ass-kicking competition, because at the end of the day, no one's going to be the true winner of this thing. This is going to be one of the most dangerous, deadly conflicts that could ever take place on the planet. But stay to the end of the video, and I will tell you how exactly it would play out starting on day one, followed through the days that would follow that initial invasion of Taiwan. And we'll also talk about how this could apply to another nation on the planet and how we can learn lessons that could counter both of these conflicts and keep them from happening. I'm glad you're here. Let's dive in. So the US military is drastically ramping up its operations in the Indo-Pacific. That's the South China Sea region. It includes areas that have Indonesia, Japan, the Philippines, Australia. All of those countries have an interest in this area, and frankly, the entire world has an interest in this area because did you know, I'm glad that you're concerned and you're curious about this. Did you know that half of the world's goods go through the South China Sea? That includes oil, gas, different commodities. They all go through that South China Sea region, which is just off the coast of Taiwan, China, Indonesia, the Philippines, Australia. That entire region has a stake in making sure that that South China Sea stays free and open. But what is China doing? What has China done to kind of just say, hey world, we're in control and there's nothing you can do about it? Well, they've essentially built man-made islands in the region. And these islands, while they claim to be commercial islands, just used for, whale watching tours. Yeah, we're just using these islands to hang out with dolphins and allow you to go swim with the dolphins. And hey, maybe even allow your significant other to give birth with dolphins. That's actually a thing. Look it up. So they're claiming that this is for commercial use, when at the end of the day, it's clear that these islands, these man-made strategic islands in the South China Sea, have military capability, because ultimately we've seen J-11s, we've seen other Chinese fighters parked at these bases. So the runways on all these bases are large enough to sustain a fighter contingent, a small squadron of fighters that can be there. Also, they include small aircraft that have massive radars that China flies in conjunction with their fighters. So them claiming that these are whale watching tours, I mean, that's going to be one heck of a whale watching tour. Hey, here comes an orca and flying overhead is a supersonic fighter. Yeah, don't worry about that little guy. This is just for commercial use. And these islands themselves actually have massive bunkers that go hundreds of feet underground. So it's clear that China is using these stations as potential hideouts and headquarters that could be used if a conflict were to kick off. So the US, to counter this, they're sending massive amounts of troops to the region, more than ever as of 2023 since World War II. And what they're doing is focusing on something that's strategically important, and that is air defenses against small and medium-sized drones and warheads. The US Army has the capability to do that. They're combining with their partners in the Philippines and Australia to make sure that all these different nations in the area have the ability to counter these small and medium-sized drones with anti-aircraft, anti-drone, anti-warhead armament that can basically shoot these things down in mid-flight prior to them being able to hit and strategically take out very important targets on the early days of a conflict with the US and China. Because it's worth noting that in 2022, China and North Korea, which we'll get to in a second, they tested more drones, more warheads, more missiles than they have tested in any year to date. So it's clear that this is a threat that isn't just made up out of thin air. We've basically seen them doing a massive amount of testing, which leads us to understand that during the early days of a conflict with a war between the US and China and in Taiwan, there's going to be massive amounts of these small drones, small warheads, maybe even medium to large size cruise missile warheads that are going to need to be shot down by the correct type of technology. And in order to do this, the US is actually partnering more than ever with the Philippines. The US is establishing 5 different bases in the Philippines. They're pumping millions of dollars into the runways. So they're basically making a statement there by saying, hey, we're gonna base Marines, we're gonna base the US Army out of these different bases. So we have a front row seat watching and seeing what China's doing. We're like, China, don't do anything wrong. Mom and dad are here watching, and China's like, why are you here? We're not doing anything wrong. All we're doing is building whale watching islands. And the US is like, yeah, we see you. We see you supersonic whale watching fighter jets. And then we got to talk about the Taiwan Strait. So that's the little chunk of land between China and Taiwan. So the Taiwan Straits themselves, long-wise, are over 21,000 miles long, but between China and Taiwan, it's only 100 miles. And this is incredibly strategically important because when the war kicks off, that's going to be the main point of battle, most likely between the US and China, or if China just outright tries to take back Taiwan with force, this is where things are really going to go down. And that 100-mile chunk of sea is kind of like when you think of the movie 300, when they're basically battling in that tiny little space in between the 2 canyon walls. It's like your massive military doesn't really matter because you're focused on such a tiny chunk of sea that it's really going to come down to the strategies, the tactics, the different technology, the different fighter jets, and what's actually in there that can bring a ton of punch without a massive amount of quantity. And for China, that big punch is going to be the HQ-9, and that's a variant of one of their most advanced surface-to-air missiles. This thing can reach out and touch strategic targets. This thing's got a range of over 180 nautical miles. So you've got the 100 nautical mile straight with 180 nautical mile capability. This really puts pressure on the US and other nations to take out these HQ-9s, these other advanced SAM systems, prior to sending any assets in there that could be taken out. And you essentially want to protect your most strategic assets like your AWACS, like your tankers, other aircraft that are gathering different types of electronic information. You want to make sure those are out of the reach of those HQ-9s, or at least they're unable to be targeted by any type of SAM system. So when it comes to day one of the war, most likely what the US is going to do is they're going to rely on cyber attack. They're potentially going to rely on air-launched cruise missiles from B-2s, B-52s, and other assets to go in and try to take out these HQ-9s, therefore clearing up that 100 nautical mile strategic piece of sea so that they're able to get assets closer in. And then that brings in my first love, the F-15E Strike Eagle. That bad boy will arrive within the first few days of the conflict, but it'll be preceded by F-15Cs out of Japan that are going to roll in pretty much right away and try to protect Taiwan from any type of aircraft launching out of Beijing, launching out of China. So first of all, you've got to get those F-15Cs on station essentially day one. They're going to have to be backed up by F-22s though. The problem with the F-22 is we just don't have enough of them, because in this conflict, you're potentially going to lose 25 to 30% of your 4th generation fighters. So that means F-15Cs going up there. You send up 100 F-15Cs, which is probably more than we would be able to on day one. You're going to be bringing back home 60 to 70 of those things. So you want to have Raptors in there that can help bring that down to a number where you're not losing quite as many. So you get the F-15Cs, the F-22s in there to do work on day 1 through 2, and then day 3 and 4, you're gonna have the F-15Es rolling in. And again, these are gonna have to be backed up by strategic assets like AWACS and tankers to keep those air combat caps, is what they're called, to keep those things running 24/7, to keep Taiwan from just being decimated in the first 3 to 4 days. And then after the air situation has been established, once we have air superiority over the Taiwan Straits, you're going to want to bring in Marines, and specifically the USS Macon Island, which is a marine amphibious assault ship that has over 3,500 Marines. You would most likely bring that in to Taiwan to protect Taiwan if an invasion would be underway, because it could be underway on day 1, 2, and 3, or to prevent it from happening. If China starts to see ships like the USS Macon Island rolling in and dropping off amphibious assault teams, maybe it would make them second guess a full-scale invasion. So getting those teams on the island after air superiority has been established and after the HQ-9s and other SAMs have been eliminated is going to be huge for deterrence, or to stomp out any Chinese contingent, any Chinese regiment that has been brought onto Taiwan. And the ship's armament alone on the Makin Island are going to be a huge armament advantage for Taiwan. That ship has 2 RIM 116 rolling airframe missile launchers, 2 RIM 7 Sea Sparrow surface-to-air missile launchers, 3 MK38 25mm close-in guns, 2 MK15 Phalanx CIWSs, 4 M2 Browning 50 caliber machine guns, and it's also got a ceremonial gun. Just in case all that other firepower wasn't enough, they're like, hey, by the way, we're gonna do a ceremony talking about how we kicked your ass. So what does China think about all this and all this military buildup in the South China Sea? Well, obviously they're saying this is unprovoked aggression, even though China has also stepped up their military war games in the area, where recently they had a military war game where they surrounded the entire island of Taiwan and basically showed that they could cut Taiwan off from any type of outside influence. That's obviously without any type of intervention from any of the powers from the West or any of the powers from the region like Japan or the Philippines. So to prepare for all this, obviously the US is doing the right thing as far as I can see. They're collaborating with the Philippines. They're even getting down to the nitty-gritty where they're collaborating on things like hand-to-hand combat should things take a spin for the worst. But obviously, in my mind, having the deterrence established off the bat with F-22s, F-15Cs, F-15Es, when China knows that we can roll in air power like we do, or even use strategic assets like satellites, like anti-drone technology, anti-short-range, medium-range missile technology, when they see us doing that, it will make them think twice about taking Taiwan and wanting to enter into a war with the US in general. So overall, when it comes to this situation, it's clear that China is basically doing what Sun Tzu says, and that is remain deceptive. China is basically saying, look, we don't want to take anything that's not ours, but the reunification of Taiwan is an internal matter to China. So they're essentially saying like, we're not trying to do anything provocative. We're just gonna take back this island that has millions of people on it, and we'll do it with force if necessary. So China's playing the long game where they're essentially waiting out and watching to see what happens, but you can bet they've got strategic plans and they're ready at a moment's notice to jump in and take Taiwan. But it's dangerous when you see China playing the victim, when China's like, hey, we don't want to do this, but we will if we have to. They're basically saying that they will use any reason, they will use any excuse possible to roll in and take Taiwan. That's why the US has to remain prepared, but at the end of the day, we got to make sure that we're not doing anything to escalate the conflict, because obviously the US and China are 2 major nuclear powers. Thanks so much for watching. Most of all, check out another video. It would mean a lot to me. Have a great day. We'll see you on the next video.